Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Had several people send me this story, including Lois and David, and it's from the abqjournal.com. Juror's podcast prompts judge to toss $40 million verdict against Presbyterian. And Presbyterian is Presbyterian Health Services. They run a bunch of hospitals and other healthcare services. But it all has to do with the podcast of a juror. So Olivier Oiterbroek wrote this, and I apologize if I mispronounced it because I probably am. But a weekly podcast aired by a jury foreperson prompted a judge to toss a $40 million verdict against Presbyterian Healthcare Services and open the door to a new trial in a medical negligence case. And again, there was a $40 million verdict, but the judge ordered a mistrial in the case after finding that comments the foreperson expressed in her podcast indicated a bias against Presbyterian and healthcare providers generally. The verdict came back in June after a 2-week trial, and the award included $15 million in punitive damages against Presbyterian. Jurors also awarded nearly $25 million to the child, who's now 6, and a total of $825,000 to the boy's parents. The couple had alleged that Presbyterian personnel failed to diagnose the infant's low blood glucose levels after the child's birth back in 2019, resulting in brain damage and permanent developmental effects. Attorneys for Presbyterian sought a new trial in July, arguing that the jury foreperson, in her zeal to sit on the jury, concealed her biased opinions about our nation's healthcare system. The foreperson hosts a weekly podcast that reveals long-held biases towards healthcare providers, which she failed to disclose, according to the attorneys for Presbyterian. And by the way, don't forget, there is a jury selection process. And they ask jurors or prospective jurors about what they do, what their hobbies are. Do they have opinions on this or that? And I'm going to let you know right now, I got called for jury duty while I had Lehto's Law videos on YouTube and was doing a podcast. And when they asked me, what do you do? I said, well, number one, I'm an attorney, but I write books, I've taught law school, and I have videos that I post on YouTube. And the interesting thing is they didn't ask me about the videos other than one person said, what are the videos about? And I said, well, I practice lemon law primarily, so it's a lot of consumer law is what I talk about. And nobody asked any further follow-up questions. And the case that they were questioning jurors for was an auto negligence case. So I think they just said, oh, he doesn't do a lot of that, and they just moved on. But they could have asked me further questions. But I can tell you right now that if I had gotten seated, which I did not, if I had gotten seated, I guarantee you I wouldn't have mentioned it until long after the trial was over. Because here I am mentioning it to you, and guess how long ago it was? Try about 8 years ago. So the attorneys had filed a motion seeking a new trial, and the motion said, this is the motion of the other side, we have learned that the foreperson published multiple episodes over the course of the trial in which she discussed her jury service and the trial, both during and immediately after the trial. And they pointed out that she's critical of healthcare in general and a whole bunch of other stuff. And one of the podcasts was recorded on May 25th, about halfway through the trial, in which she discussed her service on the jury. And she also said in the podcast, and this is a quote, other members of the jury might be listening today. So that's the allegation in their motion. If true, that's a problem, because there's general instructions they give to juries, and one of them is don't discuss the case with anybody. Now, you might say, but Steve, you're doing a podcast. You're not discussing the case with anybody. The spirit of the concept, don't discuss it with anybody, would include shooting videos or making audio that you put up on the internet for other people to listen to, okay? So the attorney for the plaintiffs responded that the defendants failed to show that the juror was biased, and they had no grounds to seek a mistrial. So the jury foreperson's opinions about things like COVID are irrelevant in a case that had nothing to do with COVID, nor can they be imputed to her overall opinion of the medical field or PHS specifically. So apparently on her podcast, she's spoken quite a bit about COVID. So They also pointed out that the juror had told the court during jury selection that she had hosted a podcast and had opinions about medical care. And they argued that jurors can have opinions, even strong ones, and strong opinions that a hospital or medical system or the court could disagree with. That does not automatically make them biased. So, in a written statement, the attorney for the plaintiffs wrote, "We respect jurors and the right to jury trial as a fundamental part of the democratic country." But the judge granted the mistrial and vacated the jury's verdict in an order that was put out in October. Based on the juror's statements, the court concludes that she was biased against the defendant. Her statements demonstrate that her negative views of medical care, providers, corporations, and hospitals, perhaps shaped during the pandemic, were durable, continuing up to and through trial. So the juror disputed the finding and denied that she discussed the trial during her podcast. And the quote is, she said, "They just totally validated all the things I've ever said about how I think it's harder and harder to get a fair trial in the country these days. I wasn't talking about the details of the trial on that show. I was just being very generalized about serving on a jury." And she's talking about the show on May 25th, which is during the trial. She said she discussed the trial on her podcast only after the jury returned the verdict, and that she had been open and honest about her role as a conservative podcast host before she was selected as a juror. She said, I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical about personal injury lawyers. I'm skeptical about politicians. I'm skeptical about healthcare when it gets mixed up with corporations. She acknowledged that she has expressed opinions on her podcast critical of corporate medical care, physicians, and the response to the pandemic. But as far as the trial goes, everything that me and the other 11 jurors did during the trial was based on just the evidence and the testimony provided to us during the trial. And so I don't have enough in front of me where I can say definitively I agree with either side of this argument. Because what I'd like to see are two things. I'd like to see what the instructions were that were read to the jurors at the beginning of the trial about who they can talk to, who they don't talk to, and what they can do with respect to the information they learned during the trial. And I've seen the admonition given many times by the judge to say, remember, when you guys leave this courtroom, do not talk about this case to anybody, not even amongst yourselves. If you go back to the room for lunch, you don't discuss the case yet. And they're told, you don't discuss it, you don't talk about it. And obviously, if somebody says, hey, why aren't you at work today? I'm doing jury duty. Oh, okay. What's the case about? I'm really sorry, I can't tell you. That's what you do. But the second thing I'd like to see is the voir dire, where they're asking the questions of the potential jurors, because there'd be a record of that, I assume. And on that record, what was she asked and what did she say? Because if she said, I'm skeptical of big medicine, I'm skeptical of it, I'd like to see if she said that, and then if she said that, what the responses were to that. I mean, did she say something like that or not? And I've seen cases, and they don't hit the news a lot, but I've seen cases before where a juror out and out lied about something and got onto a jury. I've seen a case like that. And I can think of a couple examples that come to mind, but it's usually something that can be provable and measurable, such as, has anyone here ever been arrested for a crime? Okay? And nobody raises their hands. And later on, it turns out that one of the members of the jury had been arrested by the same police department that's going to be working on this case. That kind of thing. And so does that immediately disqualify them? Not necessarily. But jurors are sworn to tell the truth during voir dire. And so they're testifying. So if you're asked a question such as, what do you do, Mr. Lehto? I say, well, I'm an attorney. I write books. And I said I also write for magazines and so on. And I have a podcast that I put up, but it's also on YouTube. Because at the time, I emphasized my podcast as much as I emphasized the videos. Oh, what's that about? Well, I specialize in consumer protection law. I do lemon law. I talk a lot about consumer protection stuff, a lot. Things in the news, that kind of thing. And if somebody says, Steve, have you ever expressed an opinion about RVs? No, never have. Isn't it true you once did a video entitled Don't Buy an RV? And that's been a theme on your channel for years? Oh, that. I mean, so the question is, was she asked those questions? And what answers did she give? And then the next thing I'd like to know is during the podcasts, the one that was put up apparently or recorded during the trial, did she mention the trial more than just saying, I'm on jury duty? Or makes you wonder. And then since then, has she expressed any strong opinions? Now, interestingly, she can always argue and say, I got the strong opinions about this after seeing what they did in that case. That's possible. It's possible. But there is the thing where if there's a good chance that something was amiss, courts kind of got to go, gee, got to do this one over again. So there is a new trial now, probably most likely coming. They could still settle. But they're in a much better position to work out a settlement, the hospital is, than they were before this verdict got tossed out. So it's a wild case. And I try to explain to people that jury duty is very, very serious. And so many people joke about jury duty. They don't want to serve it. They hate the idea. Don't get me wrong. I understand, But like I said, I've been called also. I never had to sit, but I've been called and dressed up and gone to court and hung out all day waiting for something to happen and nothing happens. I understand that. But if you ever get put on trial for a very, very serious thing, or you've got a lawsuit, or you get sued, the idea that a jury could be there to protect you, because that's what it's doing. A jury of your peers is going to decide whether or not you're guilty. Not a judge, not a prosecutor, not a police officer. A jury, especially in a criminal setting. I'll take the jury all day long and twice on Sunday. So, wild case. We'll see what happens. Lois and David, thanks for sending that. Olivier Eiderbrock wrote that for abqjournal.com. Juror's podcast prompts judge to toss $40 million verdict against Presbyterian, which is a health system that runs hospitals. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. It does not matter where you are coming from. All that matters is where you are going.